Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you again. And today I've got some things I want to share with you. And I hope that you are listening and able to take notes if you need it. Because what I'm going to talk to you about today is a very, very important part of life. You've heard me say my mother was a preacher, and she started with a little mission building where they galvanized tires at a store that they had. It was a mess, but they cleaned it up because these women were hard workers. And it began to grow, and it grew from just a few people until by the time she was aged, she had a Sunday school of 3,000 students. My mother had a gift from God. How did it all happen? It began when she was born again. Now let me tell you about that. My mother was raised Roman Catholic and she loved it. And she met my father when she came down from northern Michigan to go to college. And they worked together in a Champion spark plug place. And they fell in love. And Dad was Methodist and Mother was Catholic. And that was a barrier. They were not going to do anything to ruin that religion that both of them loved. Now my father came from Kansas. His mother had 9 sons. And they laugh about the sons. They had 1 daughter, but 9 boys. And it's a good thing they did, because the farm that they bought was 200 and some acres, and they needed every young man's strength to run that farm. And so when World War I came on, all my father's son brothers, except 2 of them, were drafted in the army. And when the war was over, they came back and they heard that Ford Boulder was paying $5 a day for people to work for them. Well, they never heard of such a thing, because that isn't what kind of money you got paid in those days. But Dad came to Michigan, began to work in the Champion spark plug company. And that's where my mother worked. My mother worked in the office, and she took care of people who had needs. And if there was a commissary, she took care of that. But Dad was in a different kind of work. I don't know what he did, but he did it. And he was good at what he did. Well, eventually, they became acquainted, and they fell in love. Well, my dad was not going to change. He would be Methodist until he died. My mother said, "Don't look at me. I will be Roman Catholic until I breathe my last." And Mother came from a strict Roman Catholic family. Lawrence, her cousin, was a Jesuit. And she had 2 nieces who were nuns. And the family were very, very proud of their religion in northern Michigan, and that was the way it was. Well, here was Mother, and here was Dad, and they lived in Michigan, southern Michigan, that is, and they fell in love. Well, they said among themselves, "Well, this is as far as we go, because I'm not changing." And my dad said, "Don't look at me. I'm not changing." And that's the way it was. Well, they were invited over to a person who worked with them in the factory for dinner. And while they were sitting in that apartment in Hamtramck, a little apartment, and Nellie, that was the lady's name, she was fixing dinner. And Mother and Dad were sitting in that small living room. And while they were sitting there talking, there was a little book on the table. Their mother had never seen a Bible like that before. Whether Dad ever did, I don't know. I never heard. But anyway, she picked up that little book and began to read from the book of Ruth. Don't forbid me to follow you. Don't be different. I am going to do something very different. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people, is what she read from the book of Ruth. And the Lord do more and aught to me, if aught but death would separate me and thee. Well, to make a long story short, they were in love and they got married. Well, after they married, Mother was sure she was going to hell. She had no peace. She loved her church. She loved her religion. And Dad was not changing. Oh, that's for sure. We found out later that when he was a young man, then the family all went to a camp meeting for the Methodists in Topeka, Kansas. Dad had an experience with God, and he was not fixing to make any changes. Well, when Mother read this little book that had a chapter in there called the Book of Ruth, and she read, Ruth said, don't ask me to leave you. Don't forbid me to follow after you. For your God will be my God, and your people will be my people. And the Lord do more and aught but death, if anything but death separates you from me. Well, they got married. They were married in the the Methodist Church, downtown New York. Downtown Detroit. I'm getting the cities all messed up. And then my mother was in torment that she had married outside of her church. And her folks did not think one thing that good about that. And they tried to convert my father. And it would work. They didn't know that when Dad was a young man, he had received the gift of the Spirit in a camp meeting. They had no idea, and Dad never told it. He never told it till he was quite aged. Well, Mother had no peace. She knew God was not pleased, and she was in trouble. Well, down 2 blocks from our house, there was a little Methodist church. And Dad wanted my mother to put my brother Jerry and Jim and I in that little Methodist church for Sunday school. So they put us in Sunday school. But Mother sat out in the lobby. She wouldn't go in that church. No way. Not a Protestant church. No way. And week after week, she took us to church, but she sat out in the lobby. Well, one Sunday when she went to church, the pastor wasn't there, but the head deacon said to her, Mrs. Beale, why don't you come on in? We don't have a service today. Our pastor is at conference. We're going to have a new preacher. Come on in today and be with us. We're just having fellowship. Well, she figured that wouldn't hurt anybody. So she went into the church, and while she was sitting there, she heard them arguing and bickering about what kind of pastor they were going to have. One person wanted one that was musical. Somebody else wanted somebody that was good with young people. Somebody else wanted something else. And they really got into arguing hot and heavy. And she thought, my God, what is this? In the Catholic Church, they send us a priest, and we love him, and we honor him. We don't go on like this. And while she was sitting there listening, she thought, I'm getting out of here. I can't handle this. So she got up and she said, he said, you don't need to seek a pastor. You need to seek him. And with that, She didn't understand why, but she turned around and knelt down at the altar. And that was the time my mother had a meeting with God. And she was born again. Well, I remember, I was just a little kid, but I remember her having me by one hand and my brother Jim by the other hand. Harry was not even, I don't think Harry was born yet. And rushing us back home as fast as our little legs would go to tell my father she was not going to hell. Well, when she got home and she told Harry, I'm not going to hell. He said, Bert, who told you you were? Ha! She said, I've known that for a long time. Well, to make a long story short, my mother began to testify to her friends. She'd had such a meeting with God that she could not keep her mouth quiet. She had to share that wonderful peace that she'd received in that Methodist church when she knelt at that altar for that little while. God had forgiven her, and she knew she wasn't going to hell. Well, my mother was born again. That's what happened to her. It doesn't happen to everybody the first time they kneel down, but it sure did to her. And then she started to witness to the folks in the neighborhood. We lived in what they called North Detroit. Now, my brother Harry was just a tiny little infant then. She'd put him in a wagon and pull him with her and go down and visit wherever she could visit to tell the people about what Jesus had done for her. Well, in time, and I haven't got time today to tell about how God added to it and how he led her and how she received the gift of the Spirit and how the Lord impressed on her so strongly with the ladies that were her friends that they needed to start a little Sunday school in North Detroit. Well, they found a store building that had been used for galvanizing tires. It wasn't very clean and it didn't smell very good from that rubber. But they went there and found out that they could rent it for $45 a month. And the women that were with her saved their grocery money. And well, everybody every month put their money in a jar. And sure enough, at the end of the month, they had $45 to rent that building for another month. And people began to come. Kids came. People came. Mama had a gift from God. She could pray, and I'll tell you, the Holy Ghost was there. And I'm telling you, people that had a need, they were met. Men came that had addictions, that could not break it, and God saved them and delivered them. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew, until, like I told you earlier, it had a Sunday school of 3,000 people. Wow. Well, I wasn't too happy about the church because of the teasing. And you know kids can tease. And I didn't know what I was going to do about it. And when I went to high school especially, they did all they could to torment the socks off me, like they say, to keep me in torment with teasing. I can remember when I graduated from the 8th grade that they had what they called prophecy. Well, they didn't call it prophecy. They called it history of what was going to happen to the students. And they said one of the girls that was a good singer was going to lead my choir in my church, and I was going to be a pastor. That infuriated me because I didn't want that. No way. And I came home squalling and bawling and bent. I was as mad as a wet head, like they say. But God was in it just the same. Well, the church grew, and it was in good work, and it grew, and my dad became a constructioner to build another church, to make room for people. And it's a long story, and I haven't got time to take care of all of that today. But it was quite a place. But I needed more. Well, freedom through forgiveness. That's the next chapter in our book that I want to talk to you about. You know, married couples get something stuck, like they say, stuck in your craw. It just comes from usually, that makes any sense. I can remember when I was married then, and we were planning on moving into another house. And when my husband knew the day that we were moving, he made himself scarce. He had all kinds of excuses why he couldn't help, what he had to do. And it made me just boiling mad because I had the whole thing to do myself. And you know, you get that resentment inside and it stays and it doesn't leave. And that thing built, and there were other occasions similar to that. And it built. It wasn't a good thing at all. I wasn't a happy person. I wasn't happy about the church. I wasn't happy about my husband. I wasn't happy about much of anything. Well, this particular Sunday in July, several years now, I went to the Sunday morning service. The kids were in Sunday school. Pete was with his friends at the church. And we had a guest speaker, and he was good. And at the end of the service, everyone was invited to come down by the altar and talk to God about what they heard. And so they all went, and I went too. And I was no more kneeling when I knew something was happening to me. I felt a presence I never had felt before. I didn't know what to think about it. And I knew that I was in the presence of God. And the Lord began to remind me about the things that I resented and that I needed to repent. And I needed to have peace. And I needed to have forgiveness. I needed to be changed. Like they said, I needed to be born again. Well, I can't explain to you how it all happened, but it seemed like in a moment of time, I was somewhere. I don't know where I was. It was like I was in the presence of God, and he was talking to me about my spiritual condition. And I saw things differently. I saw that I was aggravating Pete. I saw that I could not forgive. I built a resentment, and I was like, I was going to get even, and like he was going to get even. And our life was not a happy one. But all of a sudden, something happened. I'll take another time to tell you about it, because there isn't that much time today. But all of a sudden, I don't know where I was. I was there, of course, but I don't know where I was. But I knew God's presence was there. And I was reminded of all the occasions where I had resentment, and I needed to be forgiven, and I needed to forgive, and I needed to become a different person. When that visitation from God is what I call it, when it lifted, I was different. I was born again. I mean, I thought different. I acted different. I was different. And people said, "What happened to you, Pat?" I didn't know. All I knew, I was in the presence of God. And He forgave me. He reminded me of the occasions in my life when I didn't forgive, when it built and it festered, and I needed to be forgiven. And I asked for forgiveness, and I was forgiven, and I was different. I was different. When I got up from that kneeling place, I was different. My feet didn't even feel like they felt before. I was light-footed. I knew something wonderful had happened to me. And it had. I was born again. I never thought the same way again. I never acted the same way again. I knew I was different. I knew God had done a new thing in my life. My mother said, "What happened to you, Pat?" I didn't know. "Oh, come on, tell me." "I don't know how to tell you. I don't know. All I know, there's something happened today. I will never be the same again." And it was true. It was true. I was born again. Things that I resisted, now I wanted. Things that I had no use for were the things that I loved. And I was different. And people that knew me all my life said, "What in the world happened to you? You are not the same person." And I wasn't. I was different. I was born again. And I've never been what I was before that. Years, and I knew that I had to be used of God. I had to make it very plain for other people to know that they could be changed. There is not any reason why you have to stay the way you are. God makes us brand new creatures in Christ Jesus. And with that, He gives you the ability to forgive. He gives you the ability to be different, to not hold things against people. Freedom for forgiveness is what He gives you. And He does give it to you. And you're never, ever, ever the same person again. The things you used to resent and the bitterness and the things that were in you and your personality, you were different. You were never, ever, ever the same again. I want to have some weeks to come to explain more about it, what happened to me, and how the Lord began to use me. And it was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. He wound me up. He used me, and He made me to know that I could be of use to Him. And you know what else? He gave me peace. That resentment, that wanting to fight And I had enough Irish in me that I loved to fight. But that was not there. I was a new creature in Christ Jesus. Now I want to pray for you. Father, this is good, the Father's Day weekend. And there's many a person who has resentment against their mate, men against women or women against men. And there's no peace in that home. And there's no love in that house. And there's not that contentment there needs to be. But there can be. There is forgiveness in Jesus Christ. There is the ability to forgive and to forget. And God, you make it so different. Oh Lord, in the weeks to come, help me to tell them all that you did for me and how you did it and how they can have that same blessing because you are there to change us and to make us new creation. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for all that you've done for us. Amen.